In early May 2026, the Russian army moved 3,000 of its best soldiers in the dark. No air cover, no announcement. The 90th Tank Division, the kind of unit Russia doesn't expose on open roads, was force-marched toward Pokrovsk because the command had simply run out of other options. That single movement is where Russia's entire spring offensive began to eat itself alive. 6 months later, some of those generals are no longer in their posts. Russia's rate of advance has dropped 80% compared to the previous year, and 100,000 Russian soldiers gone. Not wounded, not reassigned, permanently removed from the order of battle. That's a military that ordered the full English breakfast, discovered the kitchen was on fire, and is now arguing about whether the toast counts as a win. To understand why the spring campaign collapsed, you need to understand one stretch of Ukrainian ground that has become the most expensive piece of real estate in modern warfare: the fortress belt. Running from Kostiantynivka down through Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk, this defensive spine isn't a line on a map. It's a place where Russian operational planning goes to die, slowly, expensively, and without anyone telling the families why. Ukrainian engineers didn't just dig trenches here. They designed interlocking kill zones so that any unit breaching the outer perimeter immediately enters pre-registered artillery fields. The belt doesn't react to attacks. It was built assuming they would come. Russia threw assault forces at the southern edges all spring. Not to break through, they couldn't get close enough for that. The objective was to apply enough pressure that Ukraine would strip defenders from elsewhere. Ukraine didn't strip. It redirected. To capture 53 square kilometers in the Donetsk region, Russia expended over 25,000 soldiers, not casualties, soldiers permanently removed from the order of battle. That figure aligns with estimates tracked by Oryx and the conflict intelligence team. For context, 25,000 soldiers is roughly the size of 2 full Russian combined arms armies at wartime strength. Putin spent 2 armies to take a piece of Donetsk smaller than the city of Bristol. And while Russia was spending those 2 armies, it was simultaneously losing ground in sectors it had held for months, ending the spring with less territory than it started with. For an operation that was supposed to break Ukrainian resistance and end the war, that is what military historians will one day describe as a poor return on investment. Or, if they're Russian historians, simply not mention. The mechanism that unraveled the offensive wasn't a Ukrainian breakthrough. Nobody stormed a trench line and broke through. Russia did this to itself. Facing pressure across multiple sectors simultaneously, the Russian general staff did what exhausted commands always do. They started moving elite units to plug the loudest holes. The first dominoes fell at Alexandrivka. A tank division pulled to plug one hole left another sector thinner than it had been the day before. The deterioration at Pokrovsk didn't stop. It spread. Then it happened again. The 39th Motorized Infantry Brigade from the 68th Army Corps, holding positions near Pokrovsk and Dobrylia, was yanked south to deal with Ukrainian pressure near Huliaipole. The 76th Airborne Division, one of Russia's most decorated units, found itself being shuttled back and forth from Pokrovsk to Zaporizhzhia, like a fire crew with 1 truck and 17 simultaneous house fires. The 40th Marine Brigade, the pride of Russia's Pacific Fleet, got pulled from Dobrylia and thrown into Huliaipole. The Pacific Fleet's Marines, in a landlocked agricultural region, chasing drone swarms through wheat fields. Ukraine didn't wait for the rotation chaos to settle. It drove straight into the gap it created. No mass assault, no armored push. Ukrainian forces identified where Russia's rotational chaos was most exposed, the Huliaipole and Alexandrivka sectors, and drove deep strikes into the supply network, keeping Russian units alive behind their own lines. Supply hubs near Novosilka, approximately 23 kilometers behind the contact line, were hit repeatedly. Without resupply, Russian units at the front couldn't hold their positions regardless of how many men they had. Drone operators found the relay antennas connecting Russian command networks and destroyed them one by one. 6 antennas blown in sequence, communications severed across the sector. An army without comms is not an army. It's several thousand frightened men who've stopped receiving orders and are now making decisions based on whatever the soldier next to them believes is happening. Into that gap, Ukraine pushed two simultaneous drives, one toward Huliaipol, one toward Oleksandrivka, splitting Russian command attention and forcing the exact troop transfers that then weakened Pokrovsk. Ukraine recaptured approximately 244 square kilometers and liberated between 9 and 12 settlements from Russian occupation. According to ISW battlefield assessments, it represented Russia's first confirmed net territorial loss since the Kursk incursion in August 2024. One Ukrainian drone unit commander, speaking to Suspilne after the operation, described it simply. They stopped retreating and started choosing where the fight happened. That's not a small thing. The territorial recapture got the headlines. What will matter longer is what happened in the sky above it. Ukraine's Strij interceptor drones, developed by Wild Hornets, a Ukrainian company whose name was apparently chosen to make Russian defense ministers uncomfortable, reportedly destroyed more than 120 Russian aerial targets in a single operational cycle. Russia spent years and considerable money building a drone campaign designed to exhaust Ukrainian air defenses. Wild Hornets hunted 120 of those drones in a single night. Russia's ground-based radar network, the coverage bubbles that made its air defense coherent, was being taken apart node by node, not in headlines, quietly, systematically, and with results that won't become obvious until the next major Russian air operation tries to launch from protected airspace that no longer exists. Ukraine's mid-range strike capacity now reaches 200 kilometers into Russian-held territory, and that single fact has reclassified what counts as a safe distance from the front. Every major logistics node in occupied Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and coastal Crimea is now within consistent strike range. Train stations, fuel distribution points near Mariupol, bridge crossings, all hit repeatedly. The Russian army has responded by pushing its supply chain further back, which means convoys travel longer distances, burn more fuel, take more time, and spend more of that time exposed to drone interdiction en route. An army that can't guarantee its own resupply stops making aggressive decisions. Not because it lacks the will, because the math no longer works. Here's the answer Moscow gives every time someone points at those 100,000 soldiers. Scale, industrial capacity. The idea that Russia simply builds and recruits faster than Ukraine can destroy. The problem is the industrial scale isn't what it was. Russian defense factories have increased monthly production rates. That's true and shouldn't be dismissed. But they're doing it without access to the precision components that make modern systems function. Chips, optical targeting equipment, advanced fire control electronics. Sanctions haven't stopped Russian production. They've just ensured that what Russia produces increasingly doesn't work as well as what it's replacing. Russia is now manufacturing weapons faster than before, while simultaneously sending T-62 tanks pulled from Soviet-era warehouses to fill armored vehicle gaps it cannot cover with modern systems. The T-62 is a 1960s design. No thermal optics, no active protection system. Against Ukrainian FPV drones running thermal targeting, it is not a weapons platform. It is a large metal object that announces its location by being warm. The Russian army is essentially sending a tank to a drone fight and hoping the drone has never heard of infrared. Oryx, which documents only visually confirmed losses, has tracked over 23,000 Russian armored vehicles destroyed, damaged, or captured since February 2022, and Oryx, by definition, undercounts. Current production cannot close a gap that size, not without the components and not at the quality the battlefield now demands. Western analysts and leaked conscription data assessed by investigative outlet iStories suggest Russian military recruitment rates dropped significantly in Q1 2026, with regional quotas going unfilled at rates not seen since the chaotic months of late 2022. Everyone inside the Russian system knows it, and nobody is allowed to say so publicly. Russia's solution, apparently, is to keep the recruitment offices open and hope the applicants haven't read a newspaper since 2021. Financial incentives that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago are no longer enough to fill the roles. Word has gotten around. This war is a one-way ticket, the money is real, and men are still not signing up. Russia, is not a general mobilization. The reason is political, not military. The 2022 partial mobilization caused a social rupture the Putin administration has never fully repaired. A second general mobilization risks something the Kremlin fears more than Ukrainian drones: internal instability at a scale that threatens the regime itself. So instead, Russia recruits at the margins, extends contracts, imposes quotas on universities and technical colleges, and absorbs monthly losses that Ukrainian General Staff estimates at over 35,000 personnel, with a replacement pipeline that structurally cannot match that rate at comparable quality. A junior officer who survived 2022 and 2023 and still knows how to lead a platoon is worth 30 conscripts who receive 3 weeks of training. Russia is running out of the former and accumulating the latter. As May turned catastrophic in the south, Russian command did what it has done repeatedly since 2022: opened a new front rather than fixed the broken one. The theory, presumably, is that if you're losing everywhere simultaneously, at least the enemy is also busy everywhere simultaneously. The Russian 122nd Motorized Rifle Regiment, assigned to hold positions on the eastern bank of the Oskol River, had been ground down to fewer than 100 effective soldiers by drone pressure and supply failures. One regiment, under 100 men. That's not a unit, that's a roll call that fits in a minibus. The Oskol line was supposed to be Russia's launch pad for renewed pressure on Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, a city Russia has been trying to threaten since the opening week of the war. Instead, it became a holding position staffed by the remnants of units that had already been bled white elsewhere. At the command level, the bill for all of this is now being presented personally. Since spring 2026, a quiet purge had been running through the Russian Ministry of Defense. Gerasimov's name appears in Western intelligence reports with increasing frequency, not as architect of victories, but as the man managing a system that is structurally failing. The officers directly associated with the spring's failed operations are being removed, not court-martialed, not publicly dismissed, just quietly absent from the command structure the next time someone checks. In Russia, when a general disappears from the organogram without explanation, it means one of two things: either he failed badly enough to become inconvenient, or he succeeded well enough to become a threat. Either way, he's gone, and the man who replaces him knows exactly what happened to the last one. Lukashenko has spent most of 2025 and early 2026 threatening Belarusian military involvement in the war. It is, at this point, his primary export. Ukraine maintains approximately 15,000 soldiers along that border anyway, not because the threat is credible, but because the cost of being wrong once is higher than the cost of watching an empty tree line for 3 years. But the threat has a ceiling Moscow itself understands. Full Belarusian military participation would likely destabilize the Lukashenko regime faster than any external pressure. His political survival depends entirely on not being the man who dragged Belarus into a war that is visibly going badly for the side he joined. Lukashenko joining this war would be the geopolitical equivalent of boarding a sinking ship because the captain offered you a better cabin. The second card is nuclear. Russia has conducted Sarmat ICBM displays, Oreshnik missile demonstrations. Senior officials make statements about strategic deterrence with the frequency of a morning weather report. An army that is genuinely winning does not need to remind the world every 3 weeks that it possesses nuclear weapons. These performances are directed at Western governments, not at Kyiv. The calculation being that fear of escalation will pressure Ukraine's allies into slowing weapons deliveries or pushing Ukraine toward negotiations on Russian terms. That calculation has not produced results. The weapons keep arriving. The 90th Tank Division made it to Pokrovsk. They arrived in the dark, unannounced, because the command had no other card left to play. That march is Russia's spring offensive in a single image. Not a campaign, but a sequence of increasingly desperate responses to a situation that stopped being under Russian control sometime around March. Russia entered 2026 demanding all of Donbass and announcing the offensive that would end the war. It is leaving the spring with less less territory than it held in January. 100,000 soldiers permanently gone, and generals who are quietly not there anymore. The 90th Tank Division marched in the dark. The question now isn't whether Russia can win this war. It's whether it can survive losing it slowly enough to call it something else. If this is how you want to understand the war, mechanisms, not headlines, subscribe. Next, what happens inside a Russian command structure that has run out of generals it trusts and offensives it can afford? There's more coming. None of it gets easier.